Viewers, welcome to TV Metro Mail. You are watching Chit Chat, and I am Emamul Haque. I'm very privileged today, very happy, very delighted to have my today's guest. I'm joined by Stephen Del Duca. Stephen, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you very much. Viewers, Del Duca holds a Bachelor of Law degree from Osgoode Hall and studied political science and Canadian history at the University of Toronto and Carleton University. Before his election, he had a long record of community involvement and a dedication to public service. Stephen Del Duca was first elected to the Ontario Legislature in September 2012 and served in cabinet as Minister of Transportation and as Minister of Economic Development and Growth. And now he is the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. Thank you very much for your time today, Stephen. So we will be talking about Ontario budget today. We'd like to know the highlights of the budget, and we'd like to know your perspective, including the approach on how you would do this in a different way. So, but before going into that, just let's begin with the U.S. election that we have witnessed last week. The departure of President Trump and the winning of Democrats. How would that impact on U.S.-Canada relationship, or how do you see that our relationship will continue in coming days? Particularly, I just want to know two specific things particularly. One is, do you see more stability in that relationship over the next coming years? And the second one is, will this have any impact on our economy or the economic progress? Thank you.
Yeah, no, for sure. So first of all, thank you so much for having me on today. I'm really delighted to be here with you. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I think virtually everybody, I'm sure, in the audience was paying close attention to the last number of days as we had a fairly unprecedented election with our neighbors and our closest allies to the south, our friends in the United States. And we saw, I guess it was sort of late Saturday morning that most of the media networks officially declared that Joe Biden is now the president-elect of the United States. I think the biggest change that people can expect to see, which will have a dramatic impact, I suspect, on both the border and travel between our two countries and ultimately our economy here in Ontario and across Canada, is how the new administration will deal with the pandemic. I think that, what we've seen in the United States over the last 8 months has been absolutely heartbreaking, with the numbers of people who've tested positive in the multi-millions and well more than 200,000 Americans who've died as a result of the virus. It's just tragic and it's heartbreaking. And I think that what you have seen so far during the campaign from President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris, and the way that they've approached it, listening to scientists, wearing their masks, adhering to the physical distancing, I think that demonstrates that they're taking this very seriously from a public health perspective. And of course, we saw some, I think, really good news. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, really good news today from the multinational pharmaceutical company Pfizer, suggesting that the vaccine that they are developing with one of their partners is proving to be dramatically more effective than perhaps was originally anticipated. So I think these are all positive steps. The reopening of the border is something that I don't believe should be occurring until Canada has a clear sense that the Americans have the virus under control south of the border. But we also know how interlinked our two economies are, particularly in Ontario. So much of our manufacturing supply chain and many of our other supply chains are intricately linked between, again, in the trade that we do back and forth between Ontario and many of the states. If ultimately there can be more stability and the economy south of the border can come back to life and be strong, I think that will ultimately benefit Ontario and Canada. So we're going to watch closely. I'm optimistic about what will happen going forward, and I sincerely hope that the U.S. can get through this transitional period, can take the virus very seriously, bring their numbers down. We can reopen the border. Lots of Ontario families have family and friends who live in the United States. I know that we've all been concerned. Yeah. So I think we've all got our fingers crossed that it'll work out okay.
Thank you very much. In fact, we all are looking forward to reopening the border, in fact. Yeah, thank you. So let's move to our topic today, that Ontario budget. So we have seen that, the last week as well, the budget has been released by the government, and
Right.
we see that it is 180 billion. I have number of facts and figures in front of
Yeah.
me. So 187 billion in total spending, and the record highest deficit as well, 38.5 billion, and the budget is included there as well, 45 billion to related to pandemic expenditures for the next 3 years. But the question is, the in any budget, we like to see Ontario families recovering from, particularly during this time, recovering
Right.
from the COVID related issues and thrive in a new economic reality or new economic landscape. So
Right.
how do you see this budget help us in those areas?
Yeah, I don't think it does. And I think what's most disappointing to me about last week's budget from Doug Ford is that there are so many people in Ontario who are vulnerable because of the pandemic that we've all been dealing with over the last 8 months, now nearly 9 months. And I don't think that any of those people, and in the groups that I'm going to discuss in just a quick second, I don't think that there's anything in the budget that's going to help them or their families to be successful. So, for example, we know that in nursing homes across Ontario, in long-term care homes, there are thousands of seniors who are vulnerable. We know that the vast majority of deaths from COVID-19 in Ontario have occurred in nursing homes. And we know that we saw the tragic reports coming from the armed forces and others months ago about exactly how dangerous and again, heartbreaking the situation was in those homes. And personal support workers who also work in those homes have had a really tough time. So I looked at the budget. I was hopeful that we would see something specific in there for nursing homes that would be urgent, that would help those vulnerable seniors and their families and the PSWs urgently in the next number of months, as opposed to the next 5 years. And there was nothing there for those vulnerable seniors. I think, frankly, it's a betrayal of people who need help from Doug Ford in this moment in time. I think of the same thing with our public schools across Ontario. More than 2 million kids that are attending school right now. And for months leading up to the reopening of schools, there was so much anxiety and so much concern from parents. And by the way, I am a politician, but I'm also a father. My wife and I are raising two young daughters. Our older daughter's in grade 8, our younger daughter's in grade 4. And so I know right here in this house of ours, within our family, how much anxiety and concern we had in July and August and through September when we were thinking about how crowded the classrooms were and how unsafe they were. I saw nothing in this budget that demonstrates to me that Doug Ford is on the side of public education. And then lastly, the other critically important area, we know that small businesses have been battered very badly during this pandemic, in particular in tourism, hospitality, the service sector, and so many workers, mostly people of color, women, Black people, Indigenous people, have been directly and negatively impacted by the pandemic. And if you're a small business owner employing a lot of people that I just described, if you've got a child in school, or you're a teacher or frontline educator, or if you're in a nursing home or you have a family member in a nursing home, there was nothing in Doug Ford's budget last week that shows that he's on your side. So I think it was a betrayal. I think it was extremely disappointing. And I think Ontario deserves better.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stephen. Stephen, I wanted to ask you about the seniors, long-term care, and even the small business. But you have answered a number of issues. But I will come to that later. Let me
Sure.
start with the small-scale business. The this budget or any the government says that they believe in strong and sustainable economic growth, and for that they need business to grow, and to business to grow they need to remove or get rid of all the kind of barriers, structural barriers, to create jobs. And in order to that, they have introduced number of things in their budget that they have said. One is subsidizing the hydro bills, about that. The other one is the which benefits 94% of the business in Ontario will see a reduction in their property taxes. So, and other one is the employer health tax. So all this will not help to grow our business or come back to the economic shape again.
So there's a couple of things to remember in this budget. Most of the relief for electricity pricing that Doug Ford is delivering for businesses is not for small businesses. It's for large businesses, what's known as Class A and Class B ratepayers. He is literally going to spend billions of dollars over the next few years to help make the electricity bills for some of the largest and strongest companies we have in Ontario cheaper. Now, I spent time as the economic development and growth minister, so I understand the need to make sure that our electricity pricing is competitive. But I also remember, as I think you do, and your audience would remember, that back in 2018, when he was looking for votes, Doug Ford looked into the eyes of the people of Ontario, and he promised that if he was elected, he would deliver a 12% reduction in residential electricity bills. Residential, not for big business. And so far, more than 2 years into his time as premier, he has neglected residential electricity bills. He has not made it in any way, shape, or form more affordable for the viewers that you have, your audience, in terms of their residential electricity bills. That tells me that Doug Ford lied to the people of Ontario 2.5 years ago when he said he would make that happen. But it also tells me that he's got a very particular set of priorities. Instead of helping everyday people, families, working families like yours and mine, instead of helping us with our weekly, monthly, annual struggles, he would rather help the biggest business owners that we have in the province of Ontario today. I support economic development. I support our business community and those individuals who are entrepreneurs who work very, very hard. But I know there are thousands of Ontario families who've really been suffering during this pandemic. And last Thursday, they were looking for some relief from Doug Ford, like he'd promised on their electricity bills, and he let them down. He betrayed them. And so I don't think that's good enough.
So thank you. So you are saying that in many ways he betrayed through this budget, reflection, the allocation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let me just come to another issue, which is we are a little bit confused, many of us, that new colored code system.
Yes.
We know the system aims to improve the situation during this COVID-19, but they are saying that but the critics they say that this framework, the new framework the government is proposing, is prioritized the economy over the public health. Do you think that there is a trade-off between the public health and the economic progress of the province?
So let me start by saying, I think you hit the nail right on the head when you talked about the confusion around this. I think what's completely unforgivable and inexcusable is that here we are now more than 8 months into this pandemic. And instead of having a system like this in place in April or May, or even July, when we got to the stage 3 in most of the province, that people could clearly understand. So it came from public health leaders, but business owners could understand it. Municipal leaders could understand it. It was very clear. It would be consistently applied, so there'd be no confusion. Doug Ford hasn't done it that way. Doug Ford's story about how Ontario is doing and how businesses can reopen has changed every single week since the summer. Every single week, there's been a different message. And so my biggest concern about the new color-coded system is it's way too late. It's way too confusing. And Doug Ford has demonstrated that instead, and he said this openly, this is not me making it up, instead of listening to public health advice, because this is a public health pandemic that we're dealing with, he's prepared to listen to whoever lobbies him. Sometimes it's members of his own caucus because they're concerned about something happening in their own ridings. Sometimes it's a mayor from a municipality who picks up the phone and Doug Ford listens to that mayor. And sometimes it's one of his friends, somebody who put Doug Ford into power, someone that he feels he has to reward because of the lobbying that they're doing. That doesn't make any sense to me. I have met with small business owners right across Ontario. I know how badly they're hurting, and I think that there should be relief for those business owners that need help. That relief should be easy to access. It should have been urgent and immediate, and it should be lots. There should be lots of relief for those who struggled. But again, this is a public health crisis. And if we don't deal with the virus effectively, we will not have an economic recovery on the other side. And what have we seen since Doug Ford introduced this new color-coded system? Ontario's numbers have not gotten smaller, they've gotten bigger. Every single day for the last number of days, our numbers have been at 1,000 or over new positive cases every single day. Doug Ford has lost control, and there's way too much chaos and confusion right now, and that does not bode well for going forward.
And I think it has a great relationship with the economic growth as well, because even our mayor, John Tory, said that this new framework, he is in favor of this, and he says that this new framework provides a path forward that will help us get to a situation where establishments can open their doors safely.
Sure.
So,
So
yeah,
Meritori did say that, but look at the situation that we've had in the last 2 days. So the province decided to take the city of Toronto and leave Toronto in a modified stage 2, as we call it. And it also said that the region of Peel would move from a modified stage 2 to a different color code, and that York and Ottawa would be in a different. But the region of Peel today and yesterday released their own restrictions that are different from what the province said. And my understanding is that tomorrow, I think it's tomorrow, Meritori and the city of Toronto will release some of their own additional restrictions. So if you're out there in the public and you're a business owner or you're a regular resident, how much confusion is that? Doug Ford says one thing, the color coding system says something different, leading public health experts say something different. Now the mayors and the municipalities are saying something different. How is anybody supposed to navigate through this system as we're grappling with the second wave? And the reason we've ended up in this really tough situation is because for months now, Doug Ford has not provided clear, consistent, coherent messages about how we're going to deal with stage 2 or wave 2 of this pandemic. And that's a horrible betrayal of the people of Ontario. It's scary.
I think when the Ontarians, they are trying to cope with the situation, they are trying their best. So how I think the government and the other political parties, how you are coordinating among yourself to handle the situation, or to help us to cope up with the situation?
I mean, the message that I've been delivering now for months to the people of Ontario, every time I do an interview, every time I'm visiting or touring different parts of Ontario, is the most important thing we can do is listen to the advice coming from public health experts. It's been consistent all the way through the pandemic. Try to stay at least 2 meters apart. Wear a mask when you're indoors or you're too close to other people. Wash your hands vigorously. Like, if people in Ontario simply listen to that advice and follow that advice, even though I know it's tough, even though I know it's very difficult to be apart from our family and friends, especially at holidays, if we listen to that advice and our leaders had enough testing, enough contact tracing, enough flu vaccinations, and really clear messaging that was competent, I think we'd be in much better shape today. Unfortunately, again, what we're stuck with is Doug Ford's confusion, his chaos, his incoherence, and numbers that are rising and rising every single day.
Okay, Stephen. I wanted to ask you about the, how does the new budget benefits our seniors and long-term care patients? You have answered that one, that this budget is not offering anything to them. But let me just but let me just remind you one thing, that the government intends to spend 1.75 billion amount of money to build new long-term care homes, and at the same time, when they are trying to build construct new long-term home care, they are also offering senior home safety tax credit, which offers 25% credit on renovation up to 10,000. So we know about that. I just like to ask you one thing. That in previous, the Liberal government, they came up with similar kind of scheme, which was called Healthy Homes Renovation Tax Credit, and that eventually that was failed, or you have to cancel that one, because unfortunately there was not enough uptake on it.
That's
so
right.
Considering all these things, how do you think that we are doing, whether we are doing enough to our seniors or not?
Yeah, so first, let me start with long-term care. If you think back to, you mentioned that the government says they're going to be investing all of that money to build new long-term care beds. They've talked about delivering more hours of care to seniors. But when you think about it, we're in the middle of the crisis right now. And we've known about this crisis for 8 months. And what Doug Ford is basically telling seniors and their families is, if you want 4 hours of care and you want that to be the standard, the average across the province, you're going to have to wait 5 more years until we can deliver that. And as for the new beds, yes, they're critically important, but you can't build or construct new long-term care facilities overnight. It takes time to acquire the land. It takes time to actually approve the architectural plans and do the construction itself. My concern is that Doug Ford has waited 8+ months instead of taking urgent action in March, April, May. Frankly, taking urgent action when he became premier 2.5 years ago. You will probably remember the stories that showed in his first 2 years as premier, before this pandemic ever occurred, Doug Ford recklessly cut the number of inspections taking place in those long-term care homes. He made it really clear from the very beginning of his time as premier, that he didn't care about what was happening in those nursing homes, that he cared a lot more about the businesses that own those nursing homes and whether they were making enough money instead of who is living and working in those nursing homes. The second piece you talked about is the tax credit to help encourage seniors to renovate their homes and stay at home longer. And you're quite right. Ontario Liberals had a similar tax credit in place a number of years ago. My concern, look, I'm very supportive of trying to find ways to give seniors a better way to stay in their own home and be healthy longer. The problem for most seniors in Ontario is that they're on a fixed income. Most seniors in Ontario are not wealthy. And if you look at a tax credit, what a tax credit requires is that you invest the money, you do the renovation up front, you keep all the receipts, and next year come tax time, you attach those receipts to your tax return and you get a rebate. But it still requires a senior, a vulnerable senior who's on a fixed income, to actually pay out the money up front. And I think this government's going to learn from our experience that there are a lot of seniors that don't have the financial means to make that kind of investment at the front end. I would much rather that the government, when it comes to home care, looks for ways to give the seniors more of an investment opportunity at the front end, as opposed to making them do it on their own and get the rebate later on. So my prediction is, even though the intent is good for the tax credit, in a couple of years, you're going to see that there are very few seniors who are actually accessing that tax credit because they're on a fixed income. And I don't think Doug Ford understands that. I think when he's talking to seniors, when he's thinking about seniors, again, because he likes to reward his friends, I think he's thinking about the seniors who are wealthy, who have lots of money in the bank and they can afford to do a renovation. Most of the seniors I know can't. They're on a fixed income. They're vulnerable. They need help at the front end, not the back end.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen, with regard to the long-term care, I think this is a much talked issue in our community. At least I know that. But we found that the approach, the liberal approach, the conservative approach, and the NDP approach is completely different. The NDP, they have a different approach. They are more kind of community-based long-term care, and as you said that the Tories or the conservative, they have a different approach, and you liberals are different, having different plan and approach. So we are very close to wrap up our show. But before wrap it up, I like to ask you one thing, that two things basically. One is, if you have any specific message to the community with regard to the budget that is offering us, whether it is offering anything interesting for the community people, for the poor, for the the Ontarians, and at the same time, if you are how you would have done it in a different way. What is your specific approach? If you just share this one, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure. So, I mean, really quickly, I would say my specific approach, my priorities, if I was premier today for this budget, would have been vulnerable seniors in the nursing homes, making sure we were investing in those seniors' homes right now, making sure that the personal protective equipment, the hours of care, how much personal support workers are getting paid, all of that would be changed now. And then we would continue to build over time the number of long-term care beds to make sure that we had top quality beds available, not 4 different beds or 4 different patients, I guess, or residents in the same room, people spread out enough so that they weren't inadvertently passing the virus amongst themselves. So, and then again, the personal support workers getting a raise in the amount of money they earn, and not having that raise canceled in March of next year, the way that Doug Ford is going to cancel their raise at that point in time. I think that that raise should go on, that they should continue to make at least $4 an hour more than they make right now. In schools, and we didn't talk too much about education, but I said back in July, before anyone else said it, in order to reopen Ontario schools safely, we need to keep class sizes small. I wanted to cap class sizes at 15, that's 1-5, no more than 15 students per class. That's, to me, that was really important from a safety standpoint, from a health standpoint, but also really important from an economic standpoint, because I'm convinced that moms and dads, if they had had the peace of mind knowing that their kids were in small classes, I think more kids would have gone back to school instead of being at home learning through a computer. And if that was the case, I think a lot more moms and dads, mostly moms, would have been able to go back to work and help with their own recovery and help with the province's recovery. And I think Doug Ford did a really horrible job on the reopening of schools. And then lastly, again, I just talked about workers and moms and dads being able to get back into the economy, be employed again, earn for themselves, support themselves and their families and their communities. We know, we've seen all the stats, we've seen the research on this. We know there are certain types of workers who've been very badly hurt by this pandemic, mostly in the service sector, mostly in tourism and hospitality, restaurants, hotels, accommodation, all of it. Most of the employees who work in that area are women, people of color, Black people, and others. They have been marginalized, they have been racialized, they were already vulnerable before the pandemic hit, and it's gotten worse. And I would have prioritized helping them, intervening and investing in them so they could actually get back into the workforce and support themselves. Doug Ford chose to go in a different direction. He wants to support big business. He wants to support his friends. He doesn't believe in building the kind of economic growth from the bottom up that I really believe Ontario should be focused on.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you.
It was wonderful to have you on our show.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, and stay safe and healthy.
Yeah, same to you. Thank you very much. You take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Viewers, thank you very much for joining us. We were talking to Stephen Del Duca, the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. We were discussing about Ontario budget, which was just released last week. He shared his insight and experience on different aspects of the budget. Viewers, thank you very much for staying with us. We'll bring our new guest in our next show. Until then, please take care and stay well. Thank you. Bye-bye.